Is everybody good? We're ready? All right, Bobby and company, it's all yours.
All right, well, it's good to be out here with all of you tonight. I appreciate the invitation to come and tell the version of the story about Larry Foster and Tom Dooley that's been passed along to me. Of course, I've heard a lot of different versions of it. Sharon's family knows one, but I'll let her tell that one some to you sometime. And it's all pretty close, but there's some differences, I guess. But that's the way that storytelling is. I can remember talking to people over in East Tennessee that said, well, my grandma was at Tom Dooley's hanging, and some would say that Tom Dooley's mother walked 40 miles to Statesville to see him hung, and which she never. But that's just the nature of stories. I need to get into that with you because all of you have heard different stories and different jokes and riddles and things like that. When I was a boy, I lived in a little house at Kings Creek, and the lady and her husband, whose house we rented from, they lived just right beside us, and she had a guitar. It hung on the wall, and I always just thought a guitar was an amazing thing. And I knew that she sang, but I didn't realize then, the kind of music that she did sing, and she sang really old music. And when I got up about 12 years old, I started paying attention to music that the old people sang. My grandfather, who he lived on the Wilkesboro Road, he rented a store building from Mr. Gordon Brawhill and his wife Sari, and he was from Mitchell County, and he kept his home up there even after he moved down here. And he had an old Victrola talking machine, and I'd play those old records. I'd go to Earl Triplett's record shop in Lenore and he had the needles that would fit on a Victrola, so that I could take them and play those records. And my grandfather liked groups like the Carter Family, which I was fortunate a little later on to get acquainted with. And it's been a pretty satisfying lifetime meeting different people and getting out and going to festivals and singing. I never thought that I would ever do anything in public when I was young, but my English teacher at High Brighton in the 10th grade, her name is Louise Adderholt, who was from the Holly Springs community originally, and her family went to church where my grandfather preached at Holly Springs Primitive Baptist Church. She took me to Appalachian, where she had taken a course under Dr. Prentice Williams, and he was a ballad scholar, and I showed him my notebook that I had written some of the old songs down in, and it started from that. And as time went by, I began to get out and meet people, and so that was all good, and it's wonderful to get out and be able to present this material to you. But I'll tell you, for the young folks, you never know what you miss, and not knowing the old timers, because they had the speech and they had the tales and they had the songs. And a number of my best friends in school that I went with was related by blood to Larry Foster and different families in the area down here. And when I was about 17, Clifton Brawhill, that he took care of the sawmills that provided a lot of the wood for the Broad Hill Furniture Company, he took me down the road here 3 or 4 miles, close to Elk Creek, to meet an old man named Wade Gilbert. And Wade told me the story of Tom Dooley, the way that he learned it. And so I'm going to tell you basically what he told me with other bits put in. You can't grow up in an area like this and not hear so many different versions. They tend to get blended in your memory. But the way I understood it was that Tom Dooley lived down close to Reedy's Branch in Wilkes County, and he went with a girl named Ann Forrester. And Ann's mother's name was, they called her Lottie, or Lot Forrester, and she was a cousin to Laurie Foster. And before the Civil War, Tom didn't go with Laurie that I know of, but he did go with Ann. And he went off and was gone for 2 or 3 years. And while he was gone, Ann married, I believe it was James Melton. When you get to my age, some of your names get hazy in your memory. I remember people's faces, but a lot of times it's hard to remember names. But anyway, Mr. Melton, I'll call him. And when Tom come home, she was married, and he started seeing a number of other girls in the community. And Laurie Foster was one of them. Well, Laurie and Ann was first cousins. And they had another cousin that lived up in Watauga County, and her name was Pauline, but it wasn't Pauline. The language had so many dialects of words in it. At one time, the name Pauline would have been pronounced either Perline or Pauline, and that's what they called her. The old folks around here would have called her Pauline back then, but it was Pauline. And Pauline Foster came down to work a while for Mr. Melton and Ann. And what they didn't know was that Pauline had what the mountain people called the pop, and some of them would call it the bad disease, and nowadays we call it syphilis. And she was here to work and get enough money up so she could buy salts of mercury. And the main doctor here in the region was Dr. Carter. And so she was working for him. Well, Tom and Pauline and Laurie Foster all wound up with the bad disease. And they said that, according to the court records, Tom, when he went to Dr. Carter, he told him that Laurie Foster had given it to him. And Wade Gilbert told me that his grandfather, who was a Hall, and his grandmother was on her porch one day and said Tom Dooley come walking down the hill, and he was muttering to himself, and he said loud enough for him to hear. He said, "I'll kill the so-and-so woman that give me this if it's the last thing I do on earth." And then he later had to tell that in court. And so they didn't know what he meant by that. At the time it was still, secret, I guess. People didn't know that they was all sick. Well, Tom was seeing Laurie Foster, who lived up in what we'd call Laytown now. I used to live up there for a while, and one of the families that lived up there told me that when they first moved there was an old house that had been tore down, and there's people in the community was getting the wood and logs from it to use, and it was probably the home that Laura had lived in. It was almost set in the road that goes through Laytown up there, but she lived up there with her dad and her family. Her mother was dead, and one morning Tom was at their house before daylight. Her daddy heard him talking, Tom outside, and then he left. And there's a road that went back into Wilkes County from Laytown, and he went back that way, and she got up before her dad did and got his mare and rode off down the road. And Uncle Wade said that on the way into Wilkes there was a little yard and a house where a granny woman lived. Now, some of you here, I'm sure, knows what I mean by a granny woman. They'd catch babies. They'd deliver babies. And she had been a slave in the Civil War time. They called her Aunt Appeline. And she come up by Aunt Appeline's house, and Aunt Appeline said, "Where you going, Laurie?" And she said, "I'm going to get married." And she said, "Well, who you going to marry?" And she said, "I'm going to marry Tom Dooley." And then she rid on off up the hill, didn't say nothing else. Rid on off up the hill, out of sight. And as far as I know, that was the last anybody ever seen her alive. Well, they got to looking for Laurie within a day or so. Her daddy was wanting his mare back, and he come a-hunting it over at Melton's and around and asking people if they'd seen it. And Tom was still around home, and Ann and Pauline was still working on their farm. Well, after a while they began to think that she must have run into trouble, and they put the heat on, and they claimed that Tom had planned to run off with, he's going to go to Tennessee and then come back in a certain amount of time and get his mother and Ann and take them with him. And he left, and that was before Ann's body had been found. And finally the search party got to looking up in the woods on what they call the Laurie Ridge now, and they sent some of the boys out in the woods that had sticks, and they'd job in the ground, see if there's anybody buried there. And the horses, and the reason they done that, the horses would shy back from a certain place there, and so they sent them out there, and they jobbed the ground with sticks until they found her body, and they drawed her up. Her body had been drawed up like that, and her clothes piled on top of it. And so Tom Dooley was a wanted man. Well, a couple of deputies went trying to track him, and they went up Elk Creek and across the mountain and through Meat Camp and across I guess it's Snake Mountain. Anyway, they come out about Zionsville and went down into Trade, and they stopped at a man's house and asked him. He said, yeah, he knew the man, said he had been there working for him. And the man who lived there, his name was Colonel James Grayson. And he hoped them to track him from there. He'd been gone, I think, maybe a day or so, but they went off, I think, on Roan Creek or somewhere over in Johnson County, and his shoes was about wore plumb out, and he had took them off and was in the creek washing his feet or cooling his feet off, and they got the drop on him, and they brung him back to Wilkes County. And so they didn't have any kind of what's the word I'm looking for?
Trying?
Extradition papers or anything. Nowadays, there's so many loopholes in the laws that I guess they'd have shook Tom's hand before they'd done anything to him. But they brought him back, and it was in the meantime, I guess, that they'd found Laurie's body. Well, the word went out that whoever would turn state's evidence, if they had a hand in it, that they'd go free. They'd tell on the rest of the party that had something to do with Laurie's death. And so they claimed that Tom Dooley's mother rid on a mule, and that Pauline Foster rode a horse, and they had a race down the river road to Wilkesboro. They said that Pauline beat Tom's mother, and that she turned state's evidence. Now what she told, I don't know. But they claim that the oral version that I learned said that she told that Ann told her to go with her one night, and she went and sat on a log, and she told her to wait there and not say nothing or she'd kill her. And she has gone up out of sight for a little while, and said in a bit that her and Tom come around the mountain, and they had a stick going from one shoulder to the other, and there was a body tied to the stick, and they went around and they buried her in the grave back there. So they arrested Ann and Tom both. And Tom had been a soldier in for the Confederacy in the Civil War, and some of his friends somehow got the ex-governor Zebulon Vance to be his lawyer, and he had they had a trial at Wilkesboro, but they had the venue changed and had another one at Statesville. And so at that trial, they said that on circumstantial evidence, they found Tom guilty. It was about 2 years before it all got done with. Ann and Tom both was in jail down there for about 2 years. They said that Tom was he was sort of what those timers would call a desperated man. He was desperate, I guess was the word. He was high strung, I guess. And it's hard now to think that he would have died for a woman or anybody else. But the night before he was to hang, he exonerated Ann Melton, said his only one had something to do with it. Well, they claim that from different people that I've heard tell the tale, said that Ann was killed because Tom thought that she was the one that had given him the part, but it turns out, in the light of what we know today, that it looked like Pauline Foster was the one that had given it to him. But the story goes that that Tom went to meet her. He had promised to marry her, and I don't know if he meant to, really meant to or not. But anyway, that when she got to the meeting place, that Ann Melton was hid there in the laurel bushes, and that she jumped out and stabbed Laurie with a knife that she had. And so I've heard it told different ways. There's one of the Dooleys one time from down that way. He told me that said the reason Tom Dooley wouldn't say nothing was because he had been with a black woman, and back then that would have been a shame for a white person to admit that, and that's why he kept his mouth shut. But they said that the last word I ever heard on it, I went to do a program up at Fort Defiance. It's been about 15 years ago, I guess, or 14. And there was a bunch of kids from Gamewell School up there that day. And one of them's granddaddy had come with him. I don't remember his name. I didn't have anything to write with. Didn't take it down. He told me that he used to come down this way for something, and he knew an old man Melton then. It was a different one than Ann's husband, of course. But he said he told him that Tom got there to meet her and that Laurie was dead already when he got to the meeting place. And I've heard people say that he held Laurie while Ann stopped her and all that, but that's just a tale. I mean, you know, different people hear some different ways, but he said that's what Mr. Melton told him, was that when Tom got there that Laurie was done dead. Anyway, the day of Tom's execution came, and they built a scaffold out on the other side of Statesville. I used to work at Mitchell Community College down there, and I went out and looked at the area where that was at. There was a field and some old factories close to it. But they said that they built a scaffold out there. The story goes that when they took him from jail, that he read on his casket in a cart, of course, and wagon. There wasn't no cars then. And that he played the fiddle as they drove him up to where he was going to be hung. And they said when he got there, he looked up and he said, "Boys, if I'd have known you was going to use a new rope on me today, I'd have washed my neck." But he didn't get to do that. His sister and her husband came. They was in the crowd, and he got up and he made his speech. And they say that about the last thing that he said was, he held out his hand like this and said, "Gentlemen, you see this hand? Does it tremble?" Said, "I never heard a hair on the girl's head." And so, well, he had confessed that he was the only one that had a hand in it. So they hung him. And back in 1982 or early in 83, I guess it was, while I was working at Mitchell Community College, I was called to go sing at a school up. It's between Statesville and Wilkesboro, on the back road that goes up through the country. And for some reason I told that story, or part of it, to the kids that day and sang the song. And the librarian of the school there, she said, "I've got something to add to your story." She said, when she was a little girl, that her grandfather lived with her family, and he was very old, and in his last few months of life, his mind wandered and he'd sort of hallucinate. And she said that when he was a young man, that he was a deputy in Statesville, and that he saw Tom when he was hung. And he said that when he come off the gibbet, that said his body just slowly turned around. And she said that in his when his mind got to wandering, that he would say, "There's Tom," swinging. And he could see him in his mind's eye when he just about forgot everything else. That image had stayed in his mind all them years of Thomas swinging there. Well, they brought Tom back to Wilkes County, and they buried him a few miles down the river here. Or not on the river, but just off of the Tom Dooley Road. And he had essentially set her free by confessing that she didn't have a hand in it. And I think she lived maybe about 10 years until she died. And Uncle Wade Gilbert said that his grandmother was one of the women that waited on her the night that she died. And there's a lot of tales about that night too. Some of them I've heard people say that she claimed that there was black cats running around the room, and that the devil was standing with the book open near the foot of the bed, and just stuff like that. But all that Uncle Wade told me was that she told that his grandmother and the other two women that was there that she had something on her mind, and if she knowed that she's going to die, she wanted to get it off her heart. But if she knowed she'd live, she wouldn't say nothing. So they give her a little while, and she got worse. And they came back in there and said, Ann said, you can't make it. And said, if you've got something to tell us, we'd like to hear it. And he said that Ann didn't say a word. Said she turned her head over and was gone in just a minute. And so if she ever told it, she told it to her children or somebody like that, I guess. I don't know. And she might have told Dr. Carter, I don't know. Sharon might be able to tell you if he had anything to say about that, I don't know. But that, as far as I know, were the only 4 people that was there the night she died. I guess her husband was around there somewhere. He apparently he didn't get to Pop, but he remarried. I think he had children by his second wife, maybe. Not positive. But anyway, it wasn't too long. There was a man, I forgot his first name, but his last name was Land, that just right around that same time he wrote a ballad about the murder of Laura Foster. It would have went on a broadside sheet of paper, I guess, printed out. It had numbers of verses to it. I know the tune of it, and I'll sing you the first verse of it, but I never did learn the whole thing. It was so long. But there was some tunes floating around it, and they began to put some words to a song, and they called it Tom Dooley. And it went around in the mouths of different people until it took the form that we have it today. I'm going to sing you a little bit of one of the old versions of it. I've heard 3 or 4, but the first tune I'm going to do is the beginning of the first song written about it was, I think it was called The Murder of Laura Foster. The tragedy I'll now relate is of her Laurie Foster's fate, how by a fickle other she was hastened to eternity. And that's all I know of that one. But I learned that from Aunt Lou Brookshire, who lived at Kings Creek. She was raised on the back side of Cox's Knob, on just the very edge of Caldwell, almost in Alexander County. And her people were blockaders. They made moonshine liquor. When she was a girl, while the old folks made the liquor, her and her sisters had to stand up on the top of the brushy mountain looking out for the government agents, and she said they'd pass the time of day by singing them old love songs like that. The old timers called them love songs, whether they were about love or whether they were about train wrecks, boys are killing their girlfriends, the ships are sinking in the deep blue sea. They weren't religious, they were known as love songs. And if they were religious, they were called meeting house songs. And if you wrote them down on paper, if you could read, then they'd call it the song ballad. But this is a little bit of one of the older versions of Tom Dooley that I learned growing up. Noticed that here in Caldwell County, generally the chorus of Tom Dooley, which usually goes "Hang down your head, Tom Dooley," or I think Doc Watson said "Hang your head, Tom Dooley." I've learned here in the county was "Oh, bow your head, Tom Dooley," and this is a little bit of it. Oh, bow your head, Tom Dooley. Oh, bow your head and cry. Kill for Laurie Foster, and you know you're bound to die. You met her on the mountain, there to be your wife. You met her on the mountain, and you stabbed her with your knife. You met her by the roadside, and there you hid her shoes. You met her by the roadside, and you hid her clothes and shoes. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Oh, hang your head and cry. Kill for Laurie Foster, and you know you're bound to die. In this world and one more, and where do you reckon I'll be? Down in a lonesome valley, hanging from a white oak tree. It's what my pappy told me is about to come to pass. Drinking liquor and bad women would be my ruin at last. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Oh, hang your head and cry. You kill for Laurie Foster, and you know you're bound to die. That's a little bit of it. About lost my voice talking. But there's been numbers of people that sung that song and talked about it. And my wife's father, he was a sensitive man to certain things. He wrote a number of songs about different things, and he would come down here and come to Laurie's grave, and he wrote a song about Laurie Foster that very beautiful song. And I'm going to get my sister-in-law Marina and her husband Doug Trivett to play the song that their daddy wrote called Laurie Foster's Fate, wasn't it?
I'm not sure, but we just got it Laura Foster's grave.
Yeah, something like that.
And we come down here, it was, I believe it was Sunday, and we went to, other people go fun places, we went to see graves. Okay. So, you know. Anyway, so we were looking at the grave, and he actually sung, my brother said he actually sung the song standing here. He might have written it before, but I don't know if he just made it up while we were standing here or what. But I'll try to do it for you.
Ready?
Way down in North Carolina, where the Yadkin was come Dooley, a wild and reckless time. He took her out one evening as the stars began to shine, as the stars began to shine. I love you, Laurie. You soon will be my wife. Then in her fair young bosom, he plunged that fatal night. He plunged that fatal night. There stands her little headstone in marble white as snow, where Laura sleeps forever as the evening breezes blow, as the evening breezes blow. The wildflowers are blooming upon this lonesome mound, where Laura sleeps forever in that cold and silent ground, in the cold and silent